Hello guys and welcome back to another episode of KSP Revival. Today we are exploring the Shan system from Cosmic Serenity 3.0. Now Shan is a semi-habitable planet that's actually somewhat cold. I mean, it's entirely covered in water. The equator is just a bunch of water. It's an entire planet-wide ocean. However, on the poles, there are actually huge sheets of ice that can actually land on like terrain. So that's what I'll be doing today. Shan also has two moons, those being Hai and Jing, which are both rather interesting places to visit, so I'll be landing on those too. To actually get to Shan from where I was previously, I'll actually be using the warp drive on the Nebulon. It's from Blue Shift. I believe it's one of the best mods in Kerbal Space Program, except it's somewhat laggy in my experience. That's actually very laggy. I had to speed up this footage 500 times just to actually get a semblance of it looking real time. Warp drives are pretty weird with Blue Shifts because they don't actually change your velocity, they only like shift things relative around you. So you still have to deal with relative velocity. So if you actually want to get a good orbit around your target, the first thing you should do is to get close to it, but not in its sphere of influence, then cancel off all relative velocity, or at least most of it, and then actually get into an orbit around it by burning towards it. Shan is an atmospheric body with a slightly more gravity and atmospheric pressure than Kerbal would, so thankfully the Helium X performs very well. Helium X is made for a high gravity atmospheric environment, so I'm sure it'll work here. Even though this is basically a sandbox save at this point, I still will collect scientific experiments just to maximize the amount of science. It may just be a number, but I kind of want to get it as high as I possibly can. Re-entry is pretty rough. I actually did make sure to change the trajectory just so it actually ends up landing near the South Pole. Because I want to be able to fly through the atmosphere a good portion, and also be able to land on the ice sheets, which seem to be coming on right now. The heat gets a little bit intense, and a whole lot of heat warning indicators start coming on, but thankfully nothing explodes. It would be slightly inconvenient if one of the air brakes on this exploded, because I will be using this SSTO for every atmospheric destination. I believe after the Shan system, I don't think there's any more atmospheric planets or moons to visit. Aside from gas giants, which I will not be attempting to land on because they're gas giants. So I don't think this SSTO will be used except to ferry the crew home when we actually arrive back at Sanctar, which I am using Celestial Harmony in this series, so I won't be using the stock system. But it won't really be noticeable because I'll be interstellar most of the time in this series. Shan does have a breathable atmosphere, so I am able to take off the helmet despite it being slightly chilly. Though it's hard to tell the thermometer because it's still changing temperature. I usually don't fill up excursion craft to the brim full of Kerbals because it's just less convenient to fill it up all the way, because having extra Kerbals usually doesn't give you a bonus. The only scenario where I would think where having a massive amount of Kerbals would actually help is with a colony where I need a whole lot of engineers. Many places in this star system, the Yunxiao star system, that I'd like to potentially colonize. Though I don't think Shan is a very good target because ideally you want to have an equatorial orbit, and all the equator of Shan is just ocean, so I can't really build a colony there. I feel like the Yunxiao system would be an excellent place for a colony because it is pretty close to some of the other star systems, specifically Anubis and the newly added Atlas system. So having a colony there would be a very good idea. I should probably put a poll on my Discord server, which, speaking of which, you should definitely join my Discord server. I also have craft files on there. So if you do want to fly this SSTO, the Helium X that I'm flying right now, you can join my Discord server, download it, make sure you have all the required mods, and then take it for a joyride. Though I do think the tweak scaling might be a little bit off because I think tweak scales doesn't actually save part scaling in the craft file. Because I've seen some issues of people using this craft and the tweak scale be off, despite it actually being installed. So it might be a minor issue you may encounter. At first I was a little worried about this ascent, because I felt like it was too shallow and I wouldn't actually end up in space. But thankfully the thrust on the vacuum engines are way more than enough to actually breach the atmosphere and return to space. And from there we can easily return to orbit, because we already have so much horizontal velocity. This wasn't the most efficient ascent because it wasn't on an equatorial plane, so it didn't have as much of the planet's circular rotation to help me out. But I don't really care about circular rotation when you have the most efficient SSTO and Kerbal space program available. Well, I'm sure it's not the most efficient, but it is pretty high up there, considering a whole lot of engines just to provide the same amount of thrusting efficiency as the Wolf Riot ones from Impulse Party. They're really overpowered, but in terms of interstellar travel, they're really only suitable for interplanetary travel if you pack enough fuel on them. So I'd say they're perfectly balanced if you put them far enough in the tech tree. Now, you may be wondering why I enable infinite electricity is because these engines actually use a whole lot of electric charge. I do actually have enough power to power them, but during time warp with persistent thrust, for some reason, it keeps thinking I'm out of electricity, even though I'm clearly not out of electricity. So I have to enable infinite electricity or else persistent thrust will keep kicking me out of time warp over and over again. I have to do that every time I use a plasma-based engine that uses a whole lot of electricity. Of course, I probably could add a bunch of more reactors, because I have heard that fixes problems with electricity being bugged in time warp. But all that adds more unnecessary mass and a bunch of other weight that you don't want. There are other mods that disable electric charge usage in time warp, but I don't think I have those, at least not up to date. Now this is Shan's first moon, Hi. It's a rather moderately sized moon with a very thick atmosphere, being 3 atmospheres. Hi may seem habitable, but it's actually very toxic, so you do not want to breathe in this atmosphere. So I think it's full of sulfur, a bunch of other nasty stuff. It's kind of like Titan, except it's 10 times more toxic. The atmosphere is similar to a Titan or any other similar moon in Kerbal Space Program. Starts up very high, and then slowly starts to get thicker and thicker as you descend. Firefly configs just show how exotic the atmosphere is when compared to, say, Kerbal or Sanctar, or other Kerbal homeworlds. The drag is also very high, because I actually end up slowing down a whole lot. The atmosphere is just that thick. At this point, I can just use the VTOL engines, which actually have a whole lot of thrust in this thick atmosphere, just to coast and slow down and land on one of these little sandbars, which seem to have a whole lot of little sulfuric volcano thingies on it. I have no idea what those are. Maybe they're like tiny little geysers. Or just sulfuric rocks that just look like geysers, because they have little holes on top. I try to get communication with back at Kerbal, or I mean Sanctar. This is Celestial Harmony after all. I try to get communications back with the Kerbal Space Center, but I couldn't really get a relay connection, so I'm gonna have to have some radio silence for the time being. You know, I'm gonna get all the Kerbals out on EVA with their helmets firmly attached, because as I previously stated, this atmosphere is incredibly toxic. After a quick EVA and a few photos, it's time to return to orbit. Now, I actually thought this was the last moon and only moon of Shan, but I actually forgot another one. That moon being Jing. It's a rather small moon in similar stature to Gilly. It's slightly further out. It also has a rather interesting color of being a very bright orange. But that might be because of the lighting, because the Yunxiao star system is more of an orangish color. Now, when it comes to atmospheric ascent, I feel like the helium does better when the atmosphere is thicker. Just as it gets thicker, it seems to do better, because these atmospheric engines love atmospheres. Especially when going from a stationary speed. Because these engines actually gain TWR based on the thickness of the atmosphere. And also, if you're going faster, they also do gain a little bit more thrust. The vacuum engines, despite being the vacuum engines, also work perfectly fine in atmosphere, although they might not work well in, say, an extremely dense atmosphere. One of the planets added by a Cosmic Serenity 3.0, I believe it's called Erebus if I recall correctly, has 95 atmospheres of pressure. I've actually tested the Helium X and made it land there with cheeks just to see how it would work. And I talked about this in the previous episode, but it actually did take off and fly, but it only got to around 20 meters per second before a drag made it stop accelerating. But I'm sure I can definitely reach orbit because the atmosphere thins out as I go higher. Now at this point, I'm not even going to get into an orbit around high, I'm just going to directly burn back into an orbit around Shan so I can rendezvous with a Nebulon. But I can just cut out all that rendezvous fluff, because I've done so many rendezvous on this channel before, so it's kind of getting old. It's just a bunch of extra footage that I don't really need in my videos. So I'm just going to skip to the docking. Now we still have one moon to visit left in this episode, that being Jing. As I previously stated, it is a rather small moon, similar size to Gilly. That machine also means it has very low gravity, so I can do some rather odd hijinks in orbit, just because it has a very, very, very low amount of gravity. So you could probably escape its sphere of influence to the Kerbal EVA jetpack if you wanted to. But you could probably do that at a whole lot of other locations, because those jetpacks are actually surprisingly overpowered. Similar to Gilly in the stock system, it also is in a somewhat eccentric orbit, so it is a little wonky to get into getting encounters sometimes. But it's not that hard. Maybe wondering why I'm not using my warp drive for everything. It's just with how laggy Nebulon is, it's just kind of awkward to warp from moon to moon. Because it means I have to turn around a whole lot and actually takes a long time. With editing, it's very short, but in real life, it's very arduous because it's super laggy. And also, doing warp drives is kind of finicky sometimes. It's just better suited for planetary travel and interstellar travel, not moon to moon travel. This moon is covering a whole lot of craters, but I'm not actually going to land in one. I'm actually going to land in one of the spots that actually isn't covered in craters. One thing I do not like about this lander is that it has almost no reaction wheel control. I mean, I could use the RCS thrusters, but those aren't as strong. And I just wish I put more reaction wheels on here, but I kind of low-key forgot in the VAB. Future versions of this lander, I'll try to add more reaction wheels. Now, unfortunately, because of the low gravity and the aforementioned lack of reaction wheels, the lander is sliding around a lot, so I'm only going to get one Kerbal out on EVA and just return to orbit. Now, because of the low gravity, I can actually do some rather odd rendezvous. I'm just going to burn straight towards the Nebulon, not even going to bother getting to orbit, and perform a small mid-course correction to actually fine-tune my approach. Because you can actually do this a whole lot with low-gravity planets and moons. But it's a little risky because sometimes when you do this, especially with really low-gravity places, my experience causes the game to crash. So sometimes you gotta be careful and be sure to make quick saves, because you'll never know when the game is gonna crash next. This install is already being held together with hopes and dreams. Might as well not tempt the Kraken. Now, this rendezvous is going to be a little inconvenient because I'm all out of hydrogen, which is basically a replacement for a monopropellant that's a bit more realistic. I mean, I do have plenty of it on the Nebulon just to refuel any vessels docked to it. So I'm going to have to actually use the Nebulon to dock to this lander first, to the Kalis lander, and then I can just easily refuel it. Thankfully, I can use reaction wheels to make sure I'm all perfectly aligned and straightened up with the docking ports. And after that, I can just transfer the fuel. Using a handy mod called TAC Fuel Balancer. It's great for removing a whole lot of the brain aches from transferring fuel. Especially if you're trying to transfer from one massive fuel tank to only the fuel tanks of a space plane. Or from a few fuel tanks to a few other specific fuel tanks. Up next, we'll be exploring the largest planet in the Yunxiao star system, that being Laozi, which is a gas giant with 3 moons. I believe one of them has cryovolcanoes, if I recall correctly. And like all other planetary travel within the star system, I will be using the warp drive to make it faster and more convenient. Now, I don't want to be using the fusion drive a whole lot. I'm only going to be using it for a very limited sublight travel, because despite being very efficient, it has a whole lot less delta V than, say, the Excalibur is. The Excalibur has a lot more delta V, the Excalibur is my previous interstellar vehicle from KSP Resurgence, the prequel series to this. It doesn't actually have as much range because it doesn't actually possess a warp drive. Now, Laozi, being a gas giant, has a very large gravity well, so it's actually really easy to get into an orbit around it using warp drives. But unfortunately, all of its moons will be explored in a future episode. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this episode of KSP Revival, and I'll see you all in the next one.